Hello, this is Richard van Roost and welcome to part 5 of the coffee cup shattering tutorial series. I promise this will be the final part. We will be using the renders we made in part 4 and composite them into one single piece and blend them together really nice. As you can see, I started up a brand new file because we don't need to render anything anymore, so I'm just going to start with the default scene and only use the compositor this time to create our final result. So to use the compositor, press Ctrl left arrow. This will give you the compositing window layout. Make sure this little button here is selected, which means you're using the compositor nodes, and check use nodes. And this will create 2 nodes. And you also want to make sure under post-processing, which we are doing now, you want to make sure compositing is checked. And then you are good to go. If we now press F12, it renders this default scene, and this result is shown here, and it's plugged into the composite node. This is the final output. So since we already rendered everything, I don't need this node, so let's delete it and add an image node, which we can use to input our image sequence. So for the original cup, select the first frame, and we can see we have 44 frames. So let's open the first one and select image sequence. And now we can specify the number of frames, so set it to 44. And if we scrub to the timeline, this frame is updating. You can also check auto refresh. So if we now plug in this result into the composite node, we see our result over here. I can use Ctrl up arrow or Shift space to make this bigger. And you can see our image is cut off on the right and the top. And this is because our render size is not set to the right resolution. I rendered this at 1280 by 720 and I want to set it to 100%. So if I now press F12, this will refresh and now we have the full frame. Okay. Let's duplicate this node to import our other image sequence, the destroyed cup. It starts at 19 and goes all the way to 100. Let's open the first image and set it again to image sequence. And we want to set the number of frames to 100, because if I scrub through the timeline and input this one, you can see it stops at frame 44 because the number of frames is set to 44. So let's make this 100. And now it's at 75 because we are currently on frame 75. Let's set the end frame to 100 of our project. And if I snap to the last frame with shift right arrow, you can see we have frame 100. Okay. We have all the frames we need. So let's see what we need to do. For the first part of the animation, frame 1, we can see, let me zoom out. And by the way, you can press numpad 1 to get to your original size, numpad 2 to get to 50% of the size. So let's use this one. For the first part, this first image sequence is fine to use, since this looks really nice. We have a full cup until here. So for frame 1 till 18, this first image sequence is perfect to use. And then we have a part where we have this. And let me zoom in. You can see the shards are looking really nice, but over here we have the cracks are already showing, and that is something we don't want. So for this part we want the left side to be this image sequence, and the right side should be the original cup, this one. And then we come to a third part of the animation. It's somewhere around frame 50, where this second image sequence is the one we want to use. So from frame 45 until the end, we want to use this second image sequence. We need to have some sort of a trick to switch between different image sequences, and you can do it in a number of ways, but I like to do it with mix nodes. So under color, add a mix node. And well, the first part where we want to have the original cup is frame 1 till 18. So I want to mix this one in 100%. And the way to do this is using the factor. And when you set the factor to 0, it's using only the first input. When you set it to 1, it only uses the second, because you can see it's white, just a solid color. So we can keyframe this factor to switch between different inputs. So I want to switch this from 0 to 1. So frame 18 is the last frame we want to use this image sequence. So press I to insert a keyframe, or right click, insert a keyframe. And then on the next frame, I'm going to set this to 1 and insert another keyframe. Okay. So for the second part between 18 and 44, we need some sort of a hybrid between those two sequences, and I'm gonna make that in a minute. But first let's add another mix node. And by the way, that hybrid is gonna go into this. So whenever it's white, we will have a hybrid between the two image sequences. And then at frame 45, we want to use this image sequence again, the last one. So press I, go back one frame, set it to 0, then we see the white color again, and press I. So what we have now is the first image sequence, then a white solid color, and then the second image sequence. Okay, so let's add this hybrid form where we have on the left part the shards, and on the right part the original cup. To do this, I'm gonna expand this window, and I want to add another mix node, and I want to mix those two images. Let's take a look. So now we have the factor set to 1, so we only have the second image sequence. If we set this to 0.5, you can see we have 50% of the first one and 50% of the second one. But I don't want to have the same factor for the whole image. So, for example, this part needs to be fully white to have only the shards. And then we have over here the cracks. Over here it needs to be black, so you don't see those cracks when the bullet is just touching the first part of the cup. So what we want is to add a mask and input it in here, which is white, and it moves kind of from left to right. There's a lot of different ways to solve this problem, but I found a really nice semi-automatic way to get this. And what I did was I added a difference key, and this will detect the difference between two images. So let's see what it does when we plug in the two image sequences. And there you can see the differences are white. We can slide down the tolerance to detect more difference. And you can see we get a lot of difference on the ground as well. That's the result of noise. I rendered this at, I believe, 128 samples per pixel, which is not enough for a noise-free image. So this is the result of that noise, but it's not that big of a deal, because the ground for the first image sequence and the second image sequence is almost the same. So it doesn't really matter how we mix the ground in. But let's turn down the tolerance really low, and I'm going to use the second output of this node. So let's take a look at what this is. It's just a black and white image of the difference. When there is a difference between the two images, it's white. When there's almost no difference, it's dark. So we can use this as a mask for the mix node. Let's collapse these two keyed mix nodes for a while and focus on this one. So let's input this mask into the factor and see what we have. And as you can see, on the left we have the shards, and on the right we have the complete cup, and at a few parts we can still see the cracks. So we need to change this matte a little. And you can see the cracks are white as well, because this is a difference, basically. So whenever it's white, it's showing the shards. So that's why we saw some shards over here. And to solve this, I want to set the tolerance to 0.01, and then turn down the fall off to have a really black and white image. So now we can really see shards over here, which is something we don't want. So to solve this, I want to use another node. It's under, I think, under filter, the dilate erode node. I'm going to plug it in here. See what happens when we use this node. Set this to distance and set this to -2, for example. And that will remove all of the shards on the right side. And if we scrub to the timeline, we can see we have a white part moving from left to right, because when the shards are getting bigger, they push through, and even though we have this erode node, they still push through it. So this is a really nice way to remove those little differences on the right side and create a nice mask. So let's see what we have now. Okay, this is completely clean, and on the left side we have the shards. But we can see we have some problems like this edge over here, and that's a result of the erode. You can view it as it just eats off 2 pixels of the edges of the white spots. And in this part we want to have the second image sequences, so this needs to be white. And if we look at the result, if you can turn off a node by pressing M. So if we turn it off, you can see it eats away a part of this edge. So to solve this, I'm going to duplicate this node, plug it in, look at the result, and set this to feather. Instead of having a negative number, I want to set this to a positive number to increase this with a soft edge. Let's set it to 20. So now we have really soft edges, and those tiny shards are not coming back because of this erode node. They were fully black, so they don't come back again if we go the other way around. So now let's look at the result. And I think this is a really clean hybrid version of the two image sequences. So at the beginning, we only have shards over here. And as we move in time, the shards emerge on the cup. And I think it looks really nice. So let's go back to our final output. And right now it's white. Everything between those keyframes is white, which is a result of this color. So let's plug in our result into this node. And now we have from frame 1 till 18 the first image sequence. Then between 18 and 44 we have this hybrid image sequence. And then after frame 44 we only have the second image sequence. Okay, let's clean this up a bit. Select those 4 nodes, press Ctrl G to group them, and call this hybrid. And we can see we're using 4 inputs, but we only have 2 different image sequences. So I can plug this in here and plug the second one in here and remove those 2 inputs. Call this image 1 and image 2. And let's press tab to go out of the edit mode for the group. And now we have a clean hybrid group, which is mixed in this node. And then only the second sequence is mixed in over here. Okay, that's everything you need to know for mixing in those shards in a proper way. Again, you can do this in various different ways. You could also animate a mask moving from left to right by hand, but I really like this method because it's kind of automated, so we only need to set a few parameters over here, and then Blender takes care of every frame. So if I would change anything about this animation, for example, change the motion, change the camera motion, whatever, I could still use this node, and Blender takes care of adding the shards in the right spots at the right time. So this is really nice. This is a really nice way to solve this. Next, we can do a lot more in the compositing layout. I'm gonna add some color correction nodes really quick. Let's add a color correction, and let's boost up the contrast a little bit. And you can see we also get a lot more saturation, so I'm gonna lower the saturation. Maybe increase the gain. And the gain will just brighten up the overall image. The gain will just brighten up the overall image, and I'm basically multiplying with this number. And I think this looks good. You can toggle this node on and off with M to see the difference, adding a lot more contrast. Let's add another node. I also like to use the color RGB curves to, for example, if I want to add more red in this image, in the lower pixel values, I'm gonna increase the lower part of this curve in the red tab, and this will add some more red. It will make it a bit warmer, and maybe remove some of the blue, and this will make it just a little bit warmer. So we can also toggle this node on and off, and I think that looks a lot better. Okay, to clean up, we can select the two color correction nodes, Ctrl G to put them in a group, and let's call this group CC for color correction. Another nice thing you could do in here is add a factor, and also plug in this one, and now we have a factor here, and you can turn off your color correction with this slider. So if you set it to 0, it's just the original image. If you toggle it on and off, we don't see any difference, and if you set it to 1, we have the full color correction. So I may want to set this to 0.8. Okay. One final thing to make this a little bit more realistic is adding some lens effects. So the first thing I want to add is a vignette, which we can do with an ellipse mask over here. We can see this is the result of the ellipse mask, and I want to make it a little bit bigger, 0.8. Let's start at 0.8 and maybe make it a bit wider like this, and then add a blur filter, set it to fast Gaussian, and crank this up to 400, which is really high, but it creates a nice subtle vignette. And to add in this vignette, what a vignette does is basically darkens the corners of your shot. So to add in this effect, I can use again a mix node, mix in my final output with the vignette, and set it to multiply. This will multiply the vignette with the image, and since the middle is white, it doesn't change anything, and the corners are dark, so you see corners are getting darker, and I want to set this to 0.5 so that it's not too obvious. But if we toggle it on or off, toggle this mix node on and off, you can see the difference. Okay, and finally another lens effect I like is the lens distortion. Oops, I added it, and it's probably over here on my, so press G to move your node, and then you can add some dispersion which adds a photographic effect, adds some chromatic aberration. So if we set this to 0.1, you can see we have a lot of chromatic aberration. It is way too much. So set this to 0.02 or something. And now it's very subtle. If we zoom in, you can see that it is there. You can toggle it on or off. And it just adds a bit more realism. And you can also use jitter, which adds noise to your image. And we can set this to fit, because the dispersion also adds a little bit of lens distortion. And you can see here we get this nasty edge. So if you set it to fit, it will scale up your image so those edges are gone. And I think we are done. So let's clean up by selecting all of these nodes and add them to a group. Let's call this group Lens Effects. And tab out of it. So now we have a clean composite canvas, and yeah. So what we did is we mixed in the first image sequence, after that a hybrid between the complete cup and the shards, and when the cup was fully shattered, we only have this final image sequence of the shards. So yeah, there we go. If you now want to render this, you can specify an output format and just press rendering an animation, press Ctrl F12, and this will render every frame you have based on your composite. So it won't do anything, since we don't have any render layers, render layer nodes in here. It won't render anything in 3D. It will only add these nodes to our image sequences and create a nice output. Okay, so the render is done. I rendered out to my temporary directory, but that's okay. If you have rendered anything and you want to view it, I render this as PNG files, but I can just press Ctrl F11 to start the Blender player, and this will just play back my render. So here we have it. I think the three parts of the animation blend nice together. So this is the first part, and the second hybrid part with half a complete cup and half a shattered cup, and then the complete shattering. I hope you found this compositing tutorial useful, and you can use it for your own projects. And I think we successfully finished this series of shattering a coffee cup with a bullet. So good luck guys, and happy blending!